Hi everyone, Jared Toadfish Rebecca here with Rhyme Signatures, the nerdiest music review this side of having the greatest personal glow-up of any soap opera character in human history. And today we're going to be doing a review of the new Southern Empire album, Another World.
I recall the day I heard the noise from far away as I played a blinding flash on my TV.
Now, I have long held the opinion that the most difficult and challenging thing a band can do is go through a change in their vocalist. After all, let's be honest, short of a few notable exceptions, the vast majority of people aren't going to notice a massive difference in a new bassist, guitarist, drummer, whoever. I mean, sure, there's going to be a degree of adjusting to any difference in sound, but by and large it's a much more straightforward differential to get your head around compared to a switch in Microphone Pundit. Just think of some of the iconic voices in the genre. John Anderson, James LaBrie, Mikael Åkerfeldt, Ross Jennings, Neil Morse. All of these and more besides have or had such identifying marks on their bands that to imagine the band without them would feel like absolute madness. So honestly, I was slightly concerned that when Southern Empire, one of Australia's many, many darlings of the genre, announced that album number 3 was finally coming, it would be without the impeccable crooning of Danny Lopresto, whose impassioned performances on the band's first 2 albums easily put him amongst the best of modern progressive rock's offerings. Instead, we have new blood to the band, Sean Holton, formerly of Projected Twin, numerous solo projects, and perhaps most intriguingly, having featured on the Aussie version of the reality show The Voice back in 2021. He certainly has the pedigree, certainly has the ability, and certainly is a worthy successor to the considerable shoes left for him to fill by Lopresto. So anyway, for those who aren't aware just who are Southern Empire, what kind of band are these guys? And what's the deal with the hype surrounding this album? Forming part of Australia's elite crew of modern progressive rock bands, Southern Empire unleashed an extraordinarily accomplished and wholly realised debut self-titled album back in 2016 that really hit that sweet spot between old school classics and modern attitudes to the genre. It was huge, expansive, unafraid, and packed a near 30-minute epic in the form of the absolutely outstanding The Bridge That Binds, and the record overall really helped to establish the band as one to keep an eye on. It was in 2018, though, when they released Civilization, that Southern Empire truly became modern progressive rock royalty. This record is one I will listen to regularly and will always point to as a perfect example of just how good modern progressive rock can be. From the short opening and closing tracks of Goliath's Moon and Innocence and Fortune, to the meat of the twin epics of Cries for the Lonely and The Crossroads in the middle of the album, this 4-track long, 68-minute behemoth really made the community sit upright and pay attention to the newest and most exciting offering from one of the newest and most exciting bands. But while there was a mere 2 years between the debut and Civilization, we've been waiting 5 long years for Another World, and of course we've had the adjustment of a new vocalist to contend with in the interim. So, given that the band were poised on the brink of world domination with Civilization, as well as the half-decade of blue-balling for this release, has it been worth it? And do Southern Empire finally ascend to the pantheon of all-time modern prog greatness? The answer is never as easy as a simple yes or no, of course, but I will tentatively say that Another World is keeping me on the edge of my seat a little while longer. Make no mistake, this is a good album. In fact, for the most part, it is a truly great album. The problem is that it's almost impossible to not compare it to the titanic effort that came out 5 years ago. And while yes, every album deserves to be measured on its own merits, free from the chains that bind it from whatever came previously, Another World still comes up ever so slightly short by the band's own very lofty aspirations. Well, so let's talk a little bit about the things that didn't really work for me that much on this album. I'm not a huge fan of the shorter songs on this. They always feel like they're kind of over before they've begun. Southern Empire have always been a band that works at their best when they allow themselves time to express themselves, and most of the shorter tracks here feel like they're never really being given the chance to truly bloom. Opening track, Reaching Out, is perfectly fine. It's a catchy, largely enjoyable effort that gives a nice hard-rocking intro and allows Sean Holton to flex his not inconsiderable range. But as far as songwriting goes, it's disappointingly safe and a far cry from the adventurous band that I'd become so accustomed to. It feels almost predictable to a fault, and kind of has more in common with 80s prog than the 70s that I'd honestly been hoping for. There's a nice vibe of Moon Safari about some of the vocal harmonies, but honestly there's something about the production of the album that's been a bit of a sticking point for me as well. The vocals are so high in the mix at almost all times. The drums feel too clean and clinical, and the guitar tone is so precise and calculating that it feels like it lacks any kind of organic ebb and flow, almost feeling programmed at times. Now don't get me wrong, the compositions are still by and large quite excellent, especially on the longer tracks like Face the Dawn, Moving Through Tomorrow and White Shadows. I just wish the overall sound of the album didn't feel so overproduced. You can polish something so much that it starts to look artificial, and that's honestly what I find so frustrating about Another World. Especially on headphones, the entire experience just feels so digital. Right, that's enough negativity for now, let's get a bit more upbeat about things. Sean Holton is pretty dang fantastic, and about as good a replacement for Lepresto as we could have hoped for. There's not an enormous tonal shift going on here. This is much more akin to the likes of Phil Collins on Trick of the Tail after Lamb Lies Down than, say, the shift from Bon Scott to Brian Johnson, for example. He soars, he dives, he sustains and dances around the microphone like a man with everything to prove. And for the most part, I'm completely on board. There are some moments where I wonder how well he'll sound on the band's older material in a live setting, but in truth I am satisfied, and it's crystal clear to me that he was absolutely the right choice for the band and fits into the Lepresto-shaped hole rather snugly. As I mentioned earlier, the longer form songs are all fantastic. Each of the 10+ minute songs managed to take me on the kind of journeys I'd been hoping for from the band's third outing. Face the Dawn is an early favourite, giving me back the comfort and confidence I had in the album after the somewhat wobbly opening track. Moving Through Tomorrow is a great song, but definitely the weakest of the longer tracks. Feeling like it's borrowing perhaps, one too many ideas and motifs from different areas. Parts of the opening of the track kinda remind me of the Arrows' I Love Rock and Roll. Not quite enough to make me double take, but enough to make me absent-mindedly fill in the lyrics with that classic 70s hit at times. And it's not until later on in the song, though, around the 4-minute mark, when the melody appears to be directly lifted from Stephen Wilson's The Pin Drop, that my brow starts to furrow a little. It's not enough to detract from the overall enjoyment of the song, sure, but it's certainly enough of a homage to distract me from what I really should be focusing on, which is the fact that this is ultimately still a very enjoyable track. Where I do think that this album hits an unquestionable home run, though, is the exquisite ballad of Hold On To Me, which for me successfully climbs to the top of the pile of prog ballads for 2023, knocking aside all would-be challengers with its impassioned vocal performance, infectious melodies, incredible guitar work, and extraordinarily emotional impact, with one of the most lighter-wielding choruses and satisfying building climaxes and payoffs that I've heard from a prog rock band this year. It's an amazing song, and easily the best of the bunch of the shorter form tracks on the album. Oh, but what of the epic? What of the near 20-minute long White Shadows? I mean, let's be honest here, Southern Empire have built their empire on the reputation of the epic, and few songs in the 2010s came close to being quite so magnificent as The Crossroads from Civilization. So to say that White Shadows had big shoes to fill would be somewhat of a grotesque understatement. Ultimately, White Shadows is a good epic. It's not in the same league as The Crossroads, but to expect a band to hit that kind of sustained excellence twice in a row would be setting unrealistic expectations. After all, once you've hit the absolute peak, it's hard to go anywhere other than down. That being said, this isn't a steep drop off the cliff face. This is more like a gentle roll downhill. White Shadows is still a phenomenal piece, full of the twists, turns, dynamic instrumentation and virtuosic performances you'd expect from a modern prog rock band, but it's just missing a little oomph, that sense of unscalable mountainous excellence that the band had set themselves up for with their previous epics. To the band's credit, though, the orchestrations early on in this song are absolutely sublime, as is the bombastic final few minutes, and really helps to mark this out as feeling truly grand and exciting. It really does capture that energy that I hope for from an epic, giving me goosebumps in the way that only the most thrilling of music can do. It has to be said that the album does finish up on a somewhat flat note, unfortunately, with Butterfly, which honestly doesn't really go anywhere interesting, or even feels like it needs to actually be on the album. It's perfectly fine, it's a song that exists, but if you're going to put something on after an epic, I think it's important to make that have a purpose. Otherwise, it's kind of just a footnote to what would have otherwise been a stellar closing point for the album. So what else can I say about Southern Empire's Another World? I know, I've been kind of punching this one while it's down a little bit, at least that's how it's come across to me whilst I've been reading this back to myself, but honestly I do still really enjoy this album. It's a new Southern Empire record. I've been waiting so long for this one, and my anticipation and hype meter was really at bursting point for this. I feel like in a lot of ways the sheer magnificence of Civilization has acted as a bit of a foil against this release, as once you've released a modern genre classic, it's always going to be hard to follow that up, and considering the fact that the band has had to source a new vocalist, as well as the lengthy 5-year wait, the cards were honestly quite stacked against Southern Empire in a lot of ways. Despite everything though, despite my criticisms and the faults I've pointed out, it mostly comes from frustration and love, as I know the band are capable of so much more than what we've been given on Another World. This is still a great album, an amazing one at times in truth, and if this had been Southern Empire's debut record, I'd have been yelling their name from the rooftops for all to hear. Instead though, I'm mostly going to want to encourage people to check out Civilization first, and then maybe check out Another World if you want a slightly more derivative, less ambitious version of that. Ultimately, I would still recommend picking up a digital copy of this one. It's a record I feel I'll keep coming back to for the parts that I love, because where this album hits, it's absolutely a knockout. It's just that the impact is softened by some minor frustrations in the production, and the constant nagging concern that this is all playing out second fiddle to what came before it. This is all, of course, my opinion, guys, as you know, so tell me what you thought of this record in the comments down below if you've given it a listen. If you did like this video, please do share it with anyone else who you think would possibly enjoy it, and please do consider subscribing to the channel for more content. I'm going to leave my link tree down below where you'll find all the usual places to find me on social media, as well as a link to my Ko-fi page if you're feeling particularly generous and want to help support the channel. But until next time guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures extremely odd.